A warmer for the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. We're going to chat with him about what we've all seen here in the first week or so of the transfer portal, some of the teams that are making good moves, some of the things that he wants to see from these teams here in the offseason, and some of the, shall we say, red flags on transfers that may not be working out as well. We're also going to be talking, because he's a man from the great state of Iowa, about Northern Iowa, the fact that they're trying to be able to keep things going with regards to their just overall tradition with their coaching change and everything that's happened with them here in the offseason, and just a few teams in general that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on, and the ACC really sticking some money into trying to be better in basketball this season as well. So we are going to be chatting about that with him and so much more. And then in the final segment, we saw a lot of guys sign with new teams in college basketball on Monday. I'm going to give you a recap of all the news and notes that we did see in college basketball on Monday. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Did not get in any Twitter/X questions today. We're going to keep this first segment relatively short, and for these first segments here for the foreseeable future, a lot of them are going to be very short unless we do see some big news, like we saw Louisville on Sunday sign those big 2 players in Flory Badunga along Jackson Shellset. I'll certainly be asking Rob about what he makes about Louisville going in on those guys as well. But that said, I'm going to be just trying to be able to give you guys a little bit of an overview of what we're seeing here and then dive into more of the transfer news in the final segment. But it does feel like now the market is really starting to be set for a lot of these transfers. Like, you take a look at the transfer portal right now, and right now I'm going to hit refresh so that way I give you guys an accurate number. There are 2,139 guys currently in the transfer portal, and as of right now, fewer than 225 of them have signed with a new team. That's because they're all waiting for the first few dominoes to fall. Which of these teams are going to perhaps have a little bit of an overpay? Like Louisville, they paid good money for Flory Badunga along with Jackson Shellset. We saw Michigan shell out the money for JP Estrella and company, so that helps set the market for the rest of these guys. Now I think we're going to see a lot of, shall we say, fast and furious moves coming over the next week or so, like we did see with North Carolina. Nicolas Avadeas is the first guy that they signed out of the transfer portal, which I think is a relatively good move for them, but I think that you're going to see just an avalanche of guys signing in the next week or so, and you still have a few guys that are going to be enlisting in the transfer portal. Last year we had about 2,500 guys enter in the transfer portal. We're up to 2,139 as of right now, and if I were to give a prediction, I think that we go over 2,500 guys this season. We shall see what is going to be happening there, but certainly I do think that we're going to get a lot of guys off the board. And keep in mind, this isn't even keeping into account the junior college transfers that we're seeing as well, because we've seen some of these JUCO guys really make a big boom. Now, a lot of these guys are not going to be going to power schools. More of these guys are going to be going to the mid-major ranks, but certainly that's going to be something to be keeping note of. This isn't even taking into account freshmen as well. And that's something else I'm going to talk with Rob about, because we are noticing that more and more power conference teams are building, I don't know if exclusively through the portal is the best way of saying it, but very much through the portal is certainly the case, and we're going to see if perhaps these freshmen that are going to be a little bit more pass over than they've been in the past might be able to make a big impact for some of these mid-major teams as well, because I do think that that's a, shall we say, unintentional effect of everything that we've seen with the boom in terms of transfers and the way that guys just transfer left and right in this day and age in college basketball. So lots to chat with Rob. We will do so on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN family podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSIN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. I know that this time of year he's doing a great job on the baseball front. When college basketball is in full swing, there's few better than him in terms of taking a look at this great game day in and day out. He's dialed in on everything that we're seeing here in the offseason, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And it's just a stark reminder when we're going through all these, transfer portal additions and even the coaches that are being new to these programs. This is where everything gets built up for the foundation that gets laid for the teams that compete in the NIT or the NCAA tournament or whatever it may be later on. And yeah, it's exciting, especially when we're actually seeing these kind of moves take place.
Yep, and this is just a general question. First things first, how do you just try to keep track of everything that happens in the offseason? Because I feel like anyone that tries to track every one of these transfers, because when you look on verbal commits, and we are going to hit the refresh button right now, there's 2,139 guys in the transfer portal, and trying to be like, hey, this guy entered in the transfer portal might be a little bit of a defeatist effort. How do you try to work, for lack of better term, smarter and not harder?
The true answer, Greg, for anybody who's kind of experienced this portal the last 3 years is it's kind of impossible to digest this stuff when you're talking about kind of one foul swoop, because not only is the transfer portal filled with a bunch of talented players that we know from maybe lower levels or maybe transferring down or maybe transferring up or maybe transferring lateral, but then you also have to factor in terms of the entire roster at these schools, the freshman class, right? And the freshman class was incredible this past offseason as well. And so it's a culmination of so many different factors. You really just got to go like piece by piece as it happens. And although the instant reactions are fun and we can kind of see what identities these teams are trying to cultivate, it's not like we're going to have definitive opinions on them here in April when it's all said and done.
No, not at all. You don't want to be doing that. And how do you take a look at some of the teams that they have made a splash here in the first week or so? We've seen it with a few teams that are running it back, like St. Louis announced that pretty much everyone not named Rob Yavla is going to be back. Michigan, they re-signed a lot of their guys, and they also bring in a guy in JP Estrella they were like over at Tennessee. And then obviously we saw on Sunday the fact that Louisville, they're going to be trying to turn over a new leaf as they bring in a pair of big guys in Flory Badunga along Jackson Gilstead.
Yeah, I think it shows intention, right? Especially when you're talking about a team like a Louisville who is putting a lot of money into the bucket of Shellstad, the Flory Badunga, and now they're even being linked to John Blackwell, who I think is arguably one of the best players available right now in the transfer portal. So from that standpoint, it's nice to see a team like a Louisville really investing in the program. Heck, even Texas has made some splash moves early as well. And I'll tell you, one of the ones that I think is just the ultimate kind of, you look at this edition, and I love it. I love every single part about it. It's Marcus Burton going over to Indiana. I kind of felt like that for a long time now with every single Indiana team, whether it's Woodson, whether it's DeVries, heck, even going back to the Crean era and the Miller era even as well. It kind of feels like they just lack that poised guard with veteran ability who can make those jumpers but also be a great facilitator. And I feel like Marcus Burton is that guy. He kind of got lost in the muck of injuries at Notre Dame this past season and Notre Dame just being irrelevant in general. But I think ultimately that's one of the best gets on the market right now. And Indiana, again, this is a team that's going to be spending money. They're invested. They're built for that sort of thing. And they're not going to be done in this transfer portal cycle, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think that they're going to be very interesting to take a look at. And The two conferences I really look at that have been intriguing here in the first week or so of the offseason have been the ACC and the Big 12. And we'll start with the ACC first because we mentioned Flory Badunga and company going on over to Louisville. They're very invested, but I do like a lot of the moves that the conference has made in general. And I recognize that Boston College is probably not going to be competing for any sort of a title here or anything like that. But I mean, with how awful they have been, at the very least, now it feels like they're a little bit more respectable with Luke Murray coming on over there. Obviously, North Carolina, we don't know what Mike Malone is going to be. It could work out. It could be a big giant flop, but we know that they're sticking in there a lot of resources as well. And it feels like the ACC is waking up and realizing that they've been passed in the pecking order of top conferences, and they're looking to be able to get back to prominence.
I think that would be kind of the framework of you they should be taking it, and because it's a 100% true thing where you look at the basement of the ACC, and it's the worst basement of all the major conferences. And heck, even you look at the Big East that had kind of a pretty bad basement in recent years, but the Paul, they're out of nowhere coming up and just they're very successful. There's a lot of conferences that have had those kind of perennial bottom feeders sort of, rise up a little bit over recent years. And that's only kind of highlighted or exacerbated how bad the bottom of the ACC is. And so when you do look at it, what a coach like a Ryan Odom did last season, or heck, even Miami with Jai Lucas or whoever it may be, in terms of kind of those middling teams that have been in the middle for a bit, really taking a step forward. Well, hey, there we go. That's going to bring up your conference. Everything, the rising tide raises all ships is what they say. I do think that's going to be a true thing when you look at the ACC. And heck, when you're talking about a team like a Louisville, who again has kind of been either, when you look at Kenny Payne's era, the basement, or just kind of the recent years, just a little middling team that a lot of people kind of forget about on a national scale. It really feels like they saw Virginia last year really, really shoot for the moon and get there. And I think, again, the rising tide raises all ships sort of thing. I think we're going to see Louisville really take a step forward this season as well.
Yep, absolutely. That's a team that I'm very bullish on as well. I think that they did a great job, and hopefully they are spending it on more than just 2 or 3 guys. They're going to need to spread the wealth a little bit, but certainly I think that that's going to be helping them out moving forward, as we've got our good friend Rob Donaldson, who does such great work over at Underdog Fantasy, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and certainly they made some splash moves. You mentioned Indiana. Are there a few other teams that, even though it might be early, you just love what you've seen out of them thus far, and you feel like they're getting it right here in the early going?
It's still a little bit early in terms of kind of taking in the bigger picture of every roster, because Iowa State, for example, is a team that has added a lot of pieces very, very fast. I think they've already added 4 or 5 transfers in this session, which is, that's getting after it. But it's a lot of guys who I don't know. I'm not really necessarily sold on from kind of mid-major ranks. And so how does that really look in the big picture with them also potentially losing a guy like a Milan Milančilović, for example? I don't know. I don't know how that kind of totality looks on the back end. And so from that standpoint, there's a lot of teams that kind of fit that bill for me as well. I do look at like a Texas A&M landing a PJ Haggerty, but knowing this is kind of my philosophy when it's come to guards in the portals over recent years. We've seen Kansas State dip into the bucket of a really good guard, bringing them through the portal. Creighton, NC State, SMU, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and a lot of these teams just haven't had kind of the ability to shrug off the my ball, hero ball mentality when it comes to actually winning games. Yeah, loading up your roster with scorers is going to make you really pop here and there throughout the season, but the teams that go deep tend to have kind of that veteran leadership at the guard position, like an Elliot Cadeau. We saw him really take over as the floor general in that run for Michigan this past season. I look at guys like that more so than the hero ball and possible shot making types to really have an effective change on a program. And so from that standpoint, I do look across the board, and there's not a lot of teams right now that are just overwhelmingly catching my eye. And again, it's still very early. There's a lot of players still out there available in the portal. But ultimately, I see a lot of teams that are adding really, really fast on the front end that I don't know if they're going to really kind of see those dividends pay off when it's all said and done.
Yep, and I'm so glad that you mentioned PJ Haggerty, who's going to be on school number 5 in 5 years. And sometimes I do feel like there's just guys in general that don't necessarily fit a system, like we saw with Texas A&M this past season. They didn't necessarily have that one go-to scorer, and PJ Haggerty, he does need to be sort of that go-to scorer. I'm not sure what you made out of it, but I feel like that's almost a little bit of a downgrade for Texas A&M, even though Haggerty by himself is really good, but I just don't know if he's going to fit that system.
I'm right there with you. And the thing with a guy like a PJ Haggerty, and there's a number of guys in the portal who I think fit this bill. Again, you're a great scorer. That's a good function to have. But I don't think it's necessarily a function or a recipe for success if all you're really doing is shooting your team out of games, not knowing how to facilitate, not conforming to what your program or what your coach is trying to instill from a culture standpoint, or just from an X's and O's standpoint. That's what really stood out to me about Elliott Cadeau in Michigan this past year is, he wasn't putting up 30-point games or 25-point games on a regular basis. Heck, I don't even know if he touched those numbers at any given point in time. But my goodness, was he making all the right decisions? Was he bought into the X's and O's? Absolutely. And from that standpoint, I do think, again, when you're talking about the portal, the teams that quote unquote won last year were like a Creighton and like an NC State and like an SMU and a USC. And what I think all those kinds of teams have in common is they added these perennial scorers. They added these really stat heavy types of players, and it didn't come to fruition. Kentucky's another great example. And I think from that standpoint, it comes down to so many different factors when you're talking about the human element of the sport. How are all these random players who have never interacted with each other before going to interact when it comes down to on the court play or when they handle adversity? And again, I think you look at the coaching front and a coach who's actually kind of built in or bought in to really stabilize those sort of adverse actions that are going to be happening throughout the season. And I look at a team like a Houston, for example, with Kelvin Sampson. Yeah, they've added a couple big-time transfers with Ulrico Gillespie, Deion Thomas Jr., and I trust Kelvin Sampson to have those guys bought in from day one. They probably know what to expect. I think that's more kind of important rather than just adding all these top-end scores to the portal and then claiming that you won the whole thing.
Yep, I agree with you. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how some of these teams just function here in the portal and add pieces as well. Because right now we're seeing the power conference teams have their pick of the litter, for lack of a better term. I feel like they're setting the market right now. And as things go along, we're going to see more of those mid-majors be able to step up. And I know that you're out there in the great state of Iowa, so I have to ask you about this. Kyle Green was an assistant over at Iowa State. He comes over, he becomes a man right now for Northern Iowa. We'll see what they do in the transfer portal. They really haven't done a whole heck of a lot yet. I'm sure that Green is trying to get settled in, and he probably hasn't moved his boxes into his office quite yet. So, I mean, he's very, very fresh there, but how do you take a look at a school like in Northern Iowa that they've had the same coach for 2 decades in Ben Jacobson, but they stay within the state for Kyle Green, a guy that has familiarity with the program, and it's very clear that while he knows that he's going to lose a few pieces, and Leon Bond, he already decided that he was going to be going to Iowa State, ironically enough, that they're trying to maintain some chemistry while at the same time trying to just be able to keep a bit of their identity at the same time too.
It's almost and I hate to say this about a program that I've really, really loved over the years in UNI, but for a team like this in terms of kind of the short-term period of time, it's nearly impossible, right, for them to almost kind of flip it. It would be one of the best coaching jobs of the entire season if Northern Iowa is back into the mix right away, right in year one with Kyle Green, because, yeah, Kyle Green might be a fantastic coach, but resources are resources, and when you have a guy who's been established there for 20-plus seasons, 25 years, when you're talking about Ben Jacobson, and he's taken some guys with him in terms of Will Hornseth has already transferred out, Trey Campbell is moving on, Tristan Smith isn't going to be there, Leon Bond's gone, Ben Schweiger's gone, Max Weisbro's gone. You're talking about a team with limited resources in Cedar Falls, Iowa, trying to attract all of these top-end, sort of players under a first-year head coach. It's just going to be an almost near impossible task in the new transfer portal era. And that's where I'm excited, because I think in the next couple of years, whether this happens this year or not, I think the freshman classes, as it pertains to the low end of schools in the country or kind of the mid majors, there's going to be almost like a market inefficiency where I think top end, freshmen that are coming into the college world are going to see their spots on these perennial sort of blue blood type teams or high majors kind of get taken over by the transfer portal guys, the guys with experience, the guys that are going to be taking their minutes because they've earned it at the college level. And all of a sudden, it just takes a couple 3 or 4 stars that are kind of getting considered by high majors to make the decision to get more playing time rather than play for a better brand. And all of a sudden, the floodgate's going to open with a lot of guys boosting their stocks in the Missouri Valley Conference, in the A10, in the American, in a lot of these leagues where, again, we've seen a lot of talented players rise from and transfer out and make millions over the last couple of years. So, again, I think for Northern Iowa, unfortunately, they're kind of up against it in the first couple of years, but, we'll see what happens. And I think that's going to be a test case for a lot of these mid-major programs.
Yep, it is going to be really interesting to see what happens with these mid-majors. And how much do you think that for the mid-majors, they need to try to capitalize on the fact that now in this day and age in college basketball, because it used to be all the top 50, all the top 75 recruits in the freshman class, they would all go to power schools, and it would be more of the mid-majors looking at the transfer portal. Now it feels like the power conference teams, they already want ready, set guys. And how much do you think recruiting actually becomes more paramount for them in this day and age and trying to catch lightning in a bottle with a freshman that maybe they wouldn't have been able to attain in the past because those freshmen may not want to go to a power conference school where they know that they're going to ride the bench and might not be getting NIL money for the first few years?
Yeah, I truly believe that when you're looking at some of these mid-majors who are kind of stuck in the boat of like non-perennial contenders, like for example, in the Utah State and Gonzagas of the world and the St. Mary's, that's kind of changing because the new Pac-12 and kind of just kind of realignment of these conferences. But when you are looking at some of these teams like Richmond, for example, that has a lot of success in their history, but just not as of late. Or, a St. Joe's, for example, a lot of these teams that they do have some resources, they're just kind of stuck in this like purgatory zone where they're better than the basement. They're just not that much better than the basement that they actually can rise to the occasion in their conference in a given year. What's the game plan? How do you get out ahead? What's the market inefficiency? I truly think it's targeting the freshman class and saying, hey, we get it. You're a 1-year rental here. You might be going to the NBA after this, or you might be transferring up to get a bag. We saw this with like Tyler Lumblade going from Belmont to Tennessee, for example. Like PJ Haggerty was at Tulsa at one point as well. I think if we can sort of have these coaches sell their programs as that stepping stone, but a stepping stone that is going to get you playing time, you're going to have the ability to showcase your talents. Once you have coaches that really dial in on that fact, again, I think the floodgates are going to open with a lot of really talented players, like a Dom Daniels, for example, probably could have gone over to VCU or to Utah State last year, done a lot of work and put up some serious numbers. And then if he had eligibility left, you would have Tennessee calling, you would have UCLA calling, you would have Ohio State, all these other programs. I think that's the new landscape of college basketball. And again, it's just going to take that kind of wave of freshmen or wave of young players to really kind of market themselves as such and really take advantage of that time.
Yep, they are going to need to, and it's going to be very fascinating to see what we get moving forward in college basketball. It's going to be a wild offseason. I know you, Rob, are going to do your best to keep your finger on the pulse of it all. And additionally, I know that in the meantime, you're doing a great job betting baseball on a day in and day out basis as well. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, it's a long college basketball season, and we're just getting a little bit of a taste of it here on the front end. Can't wait till we actually have solidified rosters and more games to be betting on. But, for those who are wanting to follow my Major League Baseball bets on a daily basis here, Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate me on, man.
It's always great to have Rob aboard. Every single time he joins me, he lends such amazing insights and did so once again today. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Cusco Soups, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast that I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in terms of big transfer moves in college basketball on Monday. And we're back here in lovely Las Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to be joined by Rob Donaldson. He does such amazing work over at Underdog Fantasy, the Rob's Best Bets Show, and so much more. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today, so a big thanks to Rob for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes in terms of the transfer news and just the general news that we saw in college basketball on Monday. How about this for Wes Miller, the new coach over at Charlotte? He brings over one of his guys from Cincinnati, Jizzle James, and you could tell that Cincinnati was a completely different team when Jizzle James was on the floor versus off the floor. He was out for like the first 10 or so games of the season, and when he returned, he shot 44% from three, 11 points per game. Cincinnati, with him on the court, very much looked like an NCAA tournament team. Without them, they lost to Eastern Michigan earlier in the season. They were very, very lackluster, all over the place on offense, and even with them out there on the court, there were times where they were a little bit all over the place on offense, but still, he was able to provide just such a big impact for this team in general. So I do think that that's going to be a massive pickup, and that's a good way for Wes Miller to really be able to set the foundation, to be able to just build his program in general over there at Charlotte. So that was big for them. Parker Fredrickson, he has decided that he is going to be adding on over to Washington, and this is a nice shrewd pickup for them. I don't think that Fredrickson is quite worthy of being a starter for Washington. He was playing over at Wake Forest a few seasons ago and had a really nice year a few seasons ago over at Wake Forest. During the 2023-24 season, as a bit of a sixth man, he was shooting 36% from three with 5 points per game. That season number two for Wake Forest, shot 25% from three, rebuilt himself as a starter for Davidson this last year, put in there a steal, 11 points per game, shot 40.5% from three, leaves a little bit of something to be desired on the defensive side of things, but certainly a guy that I think can be a nice ancillary piece for Washington. Like I said, this is a guy that should probably be coming in off the bench, giving you a few minutes in that regard, but still, I do think that that's going to be solid for them. Parker Garrett, he was over at Washington this last year, was only averaging about 2 points per game. By trade, he's a little bit more of a point guard. He's going to be adding out over to Wyoming. We'll see how much of the Sundance Wicks Wyoming roster they're able to maintain from last season, because they are going to be losing Lelon Walker. He's out of eligibility. A lot of these guys have not really entered into the transfer portal yet. With Sundance Wicks, I actually do think that he's doing a very rock solid job as Wyoming. Season number two, they were able to get to 18 wins. We saw what he was able to do over at UW Green Bay. Just feels like players like playing for him in general. It's not necessarily like a flashy style, but at the same time, they play good, tough, tenacious defense. He does a good job in terms of developing players, so we'll see how he's able to develop Garrett's moving forward, but that's a nice little pickup for them. That's going to be able to add a little bit of depth to that roster. And speaking of adding a little bit of depth, how about Finley Bizjack heading on over to West Virginia? They are going to have to reform that backcourt a little bit after Hunter Huff, top scorer from last season and was really the hero of the Crown title that they were able to win. They lose them, but Finley Bizjack, he was able, Bizjack teams was shooting 35% from three, main scorer for Butler in the backcourt this past season with 17 points, 2.5 assists per game. He heads on over to West Virginia, and I think that this is going to be a good pickup for them. Now, they're going to need to surround him with some defenders because he's not necessarily the world's greatest defender, but at 6'4", he's got some nice versatility. He's going to be able to give this team a little bit of offensive punch that, for lack of a better term, they were missing this past season. So I think that that's a really good pickup for them, and I do think that he's going to be able to help them out moving forward. The Arizona schools made quite a few pickups here over the last 24 hours. For Arizona State, they bring in Emmanuel Incente. He was over at Gonzaga, and he was that classic glue guy over at Gonzaga this past season. Not a guy that's going to just completely fill the stat sheet or anything like that. 6 points, 4 boards, and actually began his career over at Tarleton State. He's been only about a career 30% three-point shooter, but at 6'5", he's going to guard multiple positions. He's going to hit the boards. When he was over at Tarleton State a few seasons ago, he was averaging about 3 assists, steal and half per contest. He just does the little things well. That's a nice foundational piece for Arizona State. And then Nate Garcia, he was over at Cal Baptist, and keep in mind that his coach from Cal Baptist is actually now an assistant over there at Arizona State in Rick Croy. He follows him on over as well. Now, he was unable to get out there on the floor this past season as a 6'10", little bit of a freshman, but still bringing in a guy like a Nate Garcia, who's a guy that has quite a bit of good ideal size. That's going to be able to help them out. We did see Arizona add a pair of guys, Derek Dixon from North Carolina, along with J.J. Manquit. These are both guys that were freshmen that they made nice impacts for their team. Were they guys that just completely took over the show? No, for Mandequid, he's a former top 75 recruit that this past year over at Washington was a part-time starter. He was banged up throughout the back half of the season, but 5 points, 3.2 assists per contest, leaves something to be desired with his three-point shooting, but a guy that is actually born and raised in Hawaii, he comes on over to Arizona, and I feel like that could be just a good foundational fit because keep in mind they're going to be losing Jaden Bradley and a few others in that backcourt. And then Derek Dixon this past year over at North Carolina is a former top 75 recruit. I mean, he made solid contributions as a 6'5", little bit of a do-it-all guy. Nice three-point shooter at 39.5% from three. As we know, Arizona didn't pop a lot of threes, but still, he's going to be able to give you that versatility. 6.5 points, 2.7 assists per game. We've seen the way that Tommy Lloyd has been able to form a lot of these guys. He has two nice pieces to be able to utilize here, so I think that that's going to be good for them. Alcorn State had a relatively rough season, number one, and they're hoping that Nigel Thomas, a guy that redshirted this past season over at Kennesaw State, but is 6'8", has a nice little bit of a game to him, was out there in high school in the great state of Georgia where he saw a little bit of fanfare. It's going to be able to help them out. When it comes to these smaller schools, just being able to get anything on the board right now is good for them, so that's a step in the right direction, and this is a step in the right direction for Ball State. Ball State had massive struggles this last season, both on offense and on defense, and they bring in Kajai Parker, who last season was within the conference over at UMass. He was a good three-point shooter at 40% three-point shooting. Ball State was lackadaisical with regards to outside shooting. One thing Ball State did a nice job of was generating turnovers. He did average about a steal per contest last year at UMass, a little bit less than that, but 10.5 points, primarily coming in off the bench as a nice sharp shooter, was able to give out multiple assists per game. That really helps out a Ball State team that, for lack of a better term, they were struggling in all facets last season, so that's a good place to be able to start. I do think that there's a little bit more upside with them now moving forward. Frazier Knight at the Roxborough last season, he was over at Manhattan, and 2 years ago, he was one of the better three-point shooters in all of college basketball in terms of percentage. Now, he got injured last season, and in that 2024-25 season, in 19 games, he shot 48% from 3, 8.5 points per game. In a more full sample size this season, 11 points, 6 boards, shot only about 32% from 3 on a little bit of higher volume. But I do think that this is going to be a pretty nice pickup here. If he can return to the form that he had 2 seasons ago at Manhattan, it's going to be big. And over at Washington State, he's not going to have to take as many shots as he did over at Manhattan as well. He can be a little bit more of an ancillary piece. So I do think that this is going to be one that works out for them. And I do like that pickup. How about KVR Kennedy? He was over at Merrimack this last season, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Wake Forest, and he's a guy that's going to instantly be able to help out the Wake Forest defense. Now, where Wake Forest really needs help is down low. They were like 300th in the country with regards to opponent's two-point shooting percentage, but hey, even Merrimack was a really good two-point shooting percentage defense this last season. For Kennedy, stuff the stat sheet over at Merrimack, 18.5 points, 1.9 steals, 4 assists, shot 32.5% from 3. Not a guy that really took a lot of threes, but still, he's a guy that's going to be able to guard multiple positions. I do think that there's a lot of upside with him, and I think that he's going to be able to help them out quite a bit. I think that this one is going to help out as well as Cool Atok. He was over at Oklahoma this last year. He has decided that he is going to be going to Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech is going to need to just be able to repair a little bit after losing Nicolas Avadeus, and to go in on him, he is the first guy to commit to Mike Malone and North Carolina after he came over from Greece, and he's got a really nice skill set, 12 points, 3 boards, 4.5 assists as a 6'8/6'9" point guard. Not the most amazing three-point shooter in the world at 31.5% from the outside, but that's more of a pro-style guard that I'm sure that Mike Malone is looking for, so I actually really like that pickup for North Carolina, but that's getting back to Virginia Tech. They bring in Atok, who last year was able to supply 7 points per game at 6'9". He only averaged 1.4 rebounds per game, so he was a little bit allergic to the boards, but at 6'9", was able to shoot about 41% from 3, while Virginia Tech has been really good. They've been built around nice three-point shooting, so I think that that is a great pickup for them. Pittsburgh has really hit the portal hard. Like, they had 24 hours ago signed Jaleel Bethea from Alabama and Dominique DeMonde from BYU, but now they get on the board with Nathan George along with Bate and Dongo. They join Jonathan Boom Boom Powell as, shall we say, ACC refugees that go on over to Pittsburgh now, so that's going to be interesting. With Ndongo, he's going to team up with George after they 2 seasons ago were playing over at Georgia Tech together. For Ndongo, he's played all 3 years over at Georgia Tech, and this past season, was able to supply 12 points per game. Doesn't shoot threes often, but at 6'9", is about a career 35.5% three-point shooter, so he's got that in his repertoire. 2.5 assists, 8 rebounds per game. Problem was the turnovers with Georgia Tech in general, but this is a guy that's able to hit the glass. He's a guy that I think has a lot of upside and just a lot of ability in general. And then for Nathan George, he was a very good point guard both at Georgia Tech and at Syracuse this past season with the Orangey. Threw in there a steal and a half, 5.5 assists per contest, 11 points per game. Three-point shooting regrets with Syracuse, only shot about 29.5% from three. I blame a little bit of the Syracuse system in general, though, so I think that was hurting him quite a bit. But I do think that these two guys being able to team up together in Pittsburgh, really going all in on the transfer portal, that's something that you love to see. And for Oregon, they went all in on the portal on Monday as well. They've got 3 different signings that are coming their way. They're bringing in Farrell Compton from San Diego State, Tyrone Riley, also from the West Coast. He comes in from San Francisco. And then another former Mountain Wester in Andrew Meadow. Meadow, I think, is going to be the most impactful of the three. He's a 6'7" do-it-all player that last season over at Boise State, 12 points per game. He was shooting about 38.5% from the outside. Part of a Boise State team that they just never allowed you to be able to get second and third chances on the glass. They did leave a little bit of something to be desired with regards to their overall defense this past season, but you love that. For Farrell Compton, more of an ancillary piece for San Diego State this past season, 7.5 points per game. Not a guy that's really going to pop it from three, but he was able to give the team about a block per contest, has a relatively good size at about 6'8", 6'9". I think that he's going to be more of just like an ancillary piece for the team, but he's going to be a good one for them. And then with Tyrone Riley, really took off as a freshman at San Francisco. Was hoping for a little bit more out of him this last year. Wasn't like he was bad. About 12 points, 5 boards, a steal, a half a block per contest. Shot 37% from three-point, but we did see San Francisco take a little bit of setback with their defense as well, but he's got good size at about 6'4", 6'5". I think that he's going to be able to fit in relatively well there, so I think that is nice for them. Omaha set hike after they made the NCAA tournament in 2025. A little bit of a lackluster 2026, but Deke Thompson, he was over at Texas State this past season. Really couldn't get out there on the floor too much, but he's a native of the great state of Oklahoma at 6'4", and when he was in high school, he was a nice three-point shooter. He heads on over to Omaha. I think that that's going to be a nice fit for him, and I think that that's going to be able to help out this Omaha team moving forward, so I thought that was a relatively nice pickup for Butler. They have been very active here in the transfer portal line. Now they're going to be taking a little bit of a shot here because they've already brought in some, shall we say, already known guys. Jordan Ellerby, double-figure scorer from Florida Gulf Coast. Trayson Anderson, he was solid over at North Dakota State. And Edward Klafke, who was over at Ole Miss this past season, didn't see great minutes, but was a relatively solid three-point shooter. Now they bring in Samus Calderon, who he was over in the country of Brazil, played for Kansas this last year, and just was unable to get out there on the floor. Was only averaging about a half a point, half a rebound per game, but at 6'8", not necessarily going to be the most versatile player in the world, not going to attempt a bunch of threes, but I think that he's going to be able to help them out down low. It's a Butler team that they were a little bit fragile on the glass outside of Michael Ajayi this last season. It's appearing that Ronald Norad is really going to want to just have a nice balanced attack in general. This is a good way of being able to do so. I like this pickup for them, so I love that. And for Cincinnati, they have been hitting the transfer portal hard and heavy. They already brought in David Ewazi, who was actually with Jared Calhoun over at Utah State along with Miles Colvin. Now they bring in Riley Allenpatch from George Mason along with Sam Amford and Tyler Tejada from Towson. Now, for Tyler Tejada, he's a guy that is going to bring you defense. Towson was one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball, but I knew he was the main scorer. He averaged 17.7 points per game for a team that was in the bottom 40 in terms of total possessions per game. That's like averaging 20 points per game at a more up-tempo style. Now, for his career, only about 32.5% three-point shooter, but what I love about him, career 85.5% free throw shooter, not afraid to hit the glass, was a little bit more of a facilitator this past season, so I think that is a really great pickup for them. And then with Allenpatch, he this past season over at George Mason had great versatility at 6'11". He's a career 35.5% three-point shooter. Didn't attempt a lot of threes over at George Mason this past season, but was able to throw in there about 6 boards per contest. He's able to give you a little bit down low, not necessarily going to be too much of a shot blocker, but he was really able to form himself into a nice role. Do I think that he's going to be seeing the biggest amount of minutes in the world at Cincinnati? No, but I think that he could be a nice ancillary piece and give this team some relatively good depth. So that's going to be able to help them out quite a bit. Cole Kurta, he last season was over at Notre Dame, and we saw quite a few guys from Notre Dame decide where they're going to be committing to on Monday. He has decided that he is going to be going to Clemson, and this feels like a good fit for Clemson. With Kurta, shot 36.5% from three. Really picked it up towards the back half of the season because they needed him to, because with Notre Dame, they had a bunch of injuries, 14 plus points in 4 out of the last 5 games of the season. season, sometimes he needed to be relied upon as a just volume scorer. He attempted over 7 threes per game, shot 36.5% from three, shoots 89% at the free throw line, played in a relatively slow tempo style over at Notre Dame at 6'5". I think that he's going to do a nice job fitting in with the Clemson team that last year whole was greater than the sum of its parts for them. So that is a really nice pickup there. And then with another Notre Dame transfer, you got him going on over to Indiana in Marcus Burton. I know that our good friend Rob Donaldson was talking about that in the last segment, but he was a part of a rash of different guys that just decided that they were going to be going to Indiana on Monday. You've also got Darren Harris, who's going to be coming on over from Duke. And with Harris, a lot of upside with him. Just didn't necessarily see the world's greatest amount of minutes this past season. About 3.3 points per game as a former top 50 recruit. He's been a career about 31% three-point shooter, but at 6'6", he's able to guard multiple positions. Comes from a great pedigree. I like that. And for Burton, he had his season cut short for the second straight year. Like, he dealt with a few injuries during the 2024-25 season. This past year, just 10 games. When he was out there this past season, was averaging about 18.5 points per contest. 2 years ago in a more of a, shall we say, full role, 21.5 points, 1.7 steals, 3.5 boards, 3 assists, was shooting 37.5% from three-point range. He's now a go-to guy for an Indiana team that over the last few seasons, they've had relatively okay play. Like, I did think that Tucker DeVries was going to do a little bit more this past season for them than they did. And Lamar Wilkerson was a nice three-point shooter, but wasn't as much of a complete guard. Marcus Burton is that complete guy that's able to do a little bit of everything. So I think that that is very good for Indiana moving forward. And I think that this move is very good for Iona. You've got Keyshawn Mitchell, who last season was over at VCU. He joins them. They've already picked up Martin Keel, who was over at Idaho State, was a relatively solid shooter for them. And for Mitchell, didn't necessarily see the world's greatest amount of minutes this past season. He was one of those guys that followed Phil Martelli Jr. on over from Bryant. And in that last season at Bryant, 8.5 points, 6 boards, shot 32% from three, so he's able to man things down low. This past year over at VCU, only about 3.3 rebounds per game. But still, I do think that he's going to be able to do a pretty nice job at 6'11" of being able to give this team a little bit more size. Iona was a fragile team on the glass this past season, so I do think that that is going to be able to help them out quite a bit. And what is helpful for Jacksonville is that they've picked up a few guys as well. They already brought in Caleb Williams, no, not the former Oklahoma and USC quarterback who's now with the Chicago Bears, but rather the man from Lafayette. And they go within their own state for this one. Jamie Phillips, he was over at Stetson this last season, and he had his season cut short due to injury, but when he was out there for Stetson, he was their top scorer in 17 games, 16 points per contest, shot about 35% from three. It's very clear that this Jacksonville team, they're looking to be better from three-point range because they have been an anemic offense really in the Mincy era in general. And then they also bring in James Murrow. He was over at South Carolina State this last season, a career only about 27.5% three-point shooter. I expect to be just a little bit more of a glue guy. 7 points, threw in there just under a steal, 3 rebounds per game. I don't see how many minutes he's going to be able to see, but he is a native of Jacksonville, Florida. He at 6'8", is good to be able to give a little bit of versatility and size. So Jacksonville, they certainly have been able to beef up a little bit, and after they just did not have a lot of resources in general to utilize over the last few seasons, very clear that they are going to be all in for this upcoming season. And for Eastern Michigan, they lose this man to Kent State, so you've got a little bit of a interconference, shall we say, transfer at God's Love Nuabude. Hopefully I got that correct. For God's Love, last year, 5.5 points, 5.5 rebounds per game, was actually able to do a really nice job down low as a starter for Eastern Michigan, block and a half per contest. Eastern Michigan was low-key a really nice defensive team. He was able to put it all together at the back half of the season, 10 blocks in the last 3 games of the season. They do lose Doreko Gillespie, Kent State does, so they had to replace him in some form or capacity. And is he going to be Doreko Gillespie? No, but that's a good place to be able to start, and I think that this is a good pickup as well, as this man was able to do a relatively solid job over at Sam Houston State this past season in CJ Beaumont. He has decided that he is going to be going to Kennesaw State. We give our ode to Lane Kiffin, go Owls, as for Kennesaw State, they were lacking a little bit of pizzazz with regards to their overall three-point shooting this past season, and I think that he's going to be able to help this team out quite a bit as a career 42% three-point shooter. Now, didn't see great minutes this last year. He was only averaging about 3.5 points per contest, but I think that he'll be able to step up. Kennesaw State is typically one of those whole square and then some of its parts sorts of teams, so that is going to be able to help them out quite a bit. You've got LaSalle picking up another guy, as they've already picked up Trey Moss from George Washington. I like that pickup. And Vince Zanke this last season over at Niagara. He was a 38% three-point shooter at about 6'8". It's appearing as though LaSalle, they want want to be able to be a little bit more explosive on offense after last year they were one of the more, shall we say, anemic offenses in all of college basketball. And I do think that LaSalle is going to be able to get things turned around a little bit more. They don't have the NIL funds that a lot of these Atlantic 10 schools do, but Darius Nichols, I believe, is a solid coach. With Zinke, he only gave the team about 2.5 rebounds per game at 6'8", so he's going to need to hit the boards a little bit more. But I think that Nichols is going to be able to instill that into him a little bit, so I do like that pickup for them. Long Beach State, I love this pickup for them. Caleb Smith, Caleb with a K, he was over at Grand Canyon this last season. He has decided that he's going to head to Long Beach State after he just didn't see a lot of minutes this past year over at Grand Canyon. You look at what he did over at UC Riverside 2 seasons ago, 11 points, 4.5 boards. He was shooting in the mid-30s from three-point throughout his career over at UC Riverside. This last year at Grand Canyon, just could not get out there on the floor, but at 6'8", he's going to help out a Long Beach State team that was really good in terms of their defensive rebound percentage numbers. Not really going to give you a ton of three-point shooting, but he's able to give you a functional three-point shooting, so I think that that's going to be a nice pickup for them, and I think that he's going to be able to fit into that system quite well. Sean Abif, he was over at Cincinnati this last season, a 6'8" guy that just didn't see the minutes that he was hoping for. He's going to be adding on over to Florida State. He was averaging about 7 points per game. Not a great three-point shooter, but he is a native of the state of Florida, and I feel like for Florida State, they were really able to turn the corner under Luke Locke towards back half of the season last year, because for Florida State, they were just bombing from three. It felt like it was just very aimless offense. When they started to be a little bit more of a complete team, they were hitting the boards a little bit more. That helped them out. And for Abif, I feel like he could be a big cog for Lux being able to really figure it out as a college coach, because he came over after being an NBA assistant, and he's a former top 40 recruit, Abif is. So I think that this is a really good pickup for them, and I really love what they're building over there at Florida State. I love the way that they close out the season, so lots of upside with them. For Kansas State, they had another piece in the transfer portal. They actually had two more pieces in the transfer portal as Jaden Schutt comes on over from Virginia Tech, and late in the day, they were able to get JT Rock as well from New Mexico. Now, for JT Rock, didn't necessarily see massive minutes over at New Mexico. He does stand 7'1", so he's a little bit of a project guy. Was averaging about 6.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game after he was originally at Iowa State, a former top 20 recruit, just has yet to be able to put it together at the college level. But that said, at 7'1", did shoot 39.5% from three-point range. Casey Alexander, he's always done a great job in terms of being able to develop guys. We'll see what he's able to do with Rock. And then for Schutt, he's a little bit more of a known commodity. He was a bit of a sixth man this last year over at Virginia Tech. 7.7 points per game, shot 38.5% from three-point range. Belmont was always one of the better three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball under Alexander. He was a little bit of a one-trick pony guy, but that one trick was a very, very good trick these past few seasons, so that's going to be able to help them out quite a bit, and this is going to be able to help out Maryland as well. They're bringing in Robert Jennings II after they already bring in Tomislav Bujan. He comes on over from New Mexico, and now for Jennings, after he last season was over at Oklahoma State and just did not see the floor whatsoever. He actually began his career over at Texas Tech. So, he does have a few, shall we say, connections to Buzz Williams. I'm pretty sure they tried to get him in the state of Texas a few seasons ago. But, this is a guy in Jennings that 2 years ago when he was fully healthy, because for Oklahoma State, he was only able to play 3 games this last season. 5.5 points, 3.5 boards. He's not an amazing three-point shooter, but at 6'7", he's going to play good, tough, tenacious defense. That was something that Maryland was very much lacking this last season, so I think that he's going to bring a little bit more of, shall we say, the vision that Buzz Williams has for Maryland here in season number 2, so I think that that's a very helpful pickup for them. You saw Mississippi State decide that they're going to be picking up a guard in R.J. Johnson. Last season, he was over at Kennesaw State. We give our to Lane Kiffin, go Owls, and he had to pick up the point guard role after we saw Simeon Cottle get caught up in the FBI probe, and he did a nice job in terms of picking up the slack. 14.5 points, 4 assists per contest, shot about 42.5% from 3. If you look at the conference numbers and conference numbers only, this is when he saw a little bit of a bigger role, more like 16.5 points, 4.4 assists, steal per contest, shot 43% from 3, and he's going to help out a Mississippi State team that they just have not been able to get right with regards to their three-point shooting all throughout the Chris Jans era. They've been outside the top 250 in terms of three-point shooting percentage. He should be able to help out in terms of generating turnovers as well. They were terrible, Mississippi State was, in terms of generating turnovers. That's a nice pickup for them. them. And this is a nice pickup for Missouri. They're going to be bringing in Jalen Carey, who he was a nice defender over at Tennessee this last season, played some time over at Vanderbilt as well. Not a guy that's going to light you up from three at 6'8", career only about 25 or so percent three-point shooter, but 7.5 points, 6 boards, a little bit under a block per contest this last season. He's going to do a nice job down low. Probably not a guy that you want to feature, but I'm pretty sure that Mark Mitchell is out of eligibility, so we've noticed with Missouri they had much more of an emphasis on hitting the glass this last season, so he's going to be able to continue on with that. So I do like what he's going to be able to do, and I think that this is going to be a nice pickup for them. And I like this pickup as well. Christian Hammond, he had himself a really nice year over Santa Clara. As we know, with Santa Clara, they fall to Kentucky, and for Hammond, now he's going to be getting paid over at NC State. With NC State, it's going to be a little bit different without Will Wade. So I mean, for Hammond, he's probably going to be seeing good minutes right away. Last year, over at Santa Clara, shot 39.5% from three-point range, 15.5 points, 2.5 assists, a little bit over a steal per contest, 6'4", do-it-all guard. I think that that's a really nice building spot for NC State. Now, they've got a long way to go to be able to fill up this roster. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but it's a nice place to be able to start for them, and this is a nice place for Oklahoma State to start. They're going to be losing quite a few of their guys from 8 seasons ago, but Luka Bragovic, he was over at North Carolina this last year, one of the few guys that was really able to bomb it from three-point range for them, but I mean, that said, he was able to supply about 10 points, 2 assists, shot 35% from three, comes over from Montenegro as a 6'6", a little bit of a combo guy. He played in a North Carolina team that wasn't as up-tempo as they have been in the past, but a team that's able to play with a little bit of length. Oklahoma State under Steve Lutz, they've been playing at a very rapid pace. I think that that's going to be a nice fit for them. You've got Connie Roos, who he last season was over at Louisville, and he's decided that he is going to be going to Oklahoma. When he saw good minutes, he was able to be a nice starter for the few games that he was able to start. He's been a little bit more of a project for Louisville, but 5.5 points, 4.5 boards. Not a guy that really gives you a lot of three-point shooting at 6'8", but for Oklahoma, they were very lackluster on the defensive side of things this past season. He should be able to help out with that quite a bit, and I think that that was a nice, shall we say, under-the-radar pickup for them. RJ Taylor was over at Northern Iowa this past season. Didn't necessarily see a bunch of minutes, but he was a 37.5% three-point shooter, a native of the great state of Michigan, and for Oakland, they lose quite a bit of their roster from a season ago. They're going to be bringing in Taylor as a little bit of a project to be able to help out the backcourt, and Oakland, once again, much like they've done over the last few seasons, they are very much attracting the junior college, shall we say, market as well, so they're going to be able to get a little bit of help there, but I do like this pickup for them. I feel like he's a little bit of a project. He's a little bit unproven, but still might be very fruitful for the team moving forward, so I thought that that was a nice pickup for them. We saw KJ Evans, who just has not lived up to his former top 25 billing when he came into college, but he was able to be much better this past season over at Oregon, and he's going to be heading on over to Villanova. For Villanova, I feel like his versatility is going to be great for them. For Evans this last year, 13.5 points, 7.5 boards, pair of assists from three-point range. He shot only about 30%. He's never going to be an amazing three-point shooter, but he was able to supply a little bit over a block per contest. We did notice with Villanova, outside of Duke Brandon, they really didn't have a lot of rebounding. Tyler Perkins was like the lone other guy on the roster that supplied over 4 rebounds per game. This should be able to give them a little bit more balance and just a little bit more, shall we say, oomph down low, so that's going to be nice for them. And for UCLA, they've already picked up 2, shall we say, 6'8" combo players in Philip Jovic along with Sergei Makira, ironically enough from the SEC. They're going down south for this one once again, but now they're going to be looking to build the backcourt around Jalen Petty. For Petty, he had a nice year this last year over at Texas Tech. 10 points, 4 boards, shot 37.5% from three-point. Really came on strong towards the back half of the season when JT Toppin went down with an injury. They needed a little bit more out of him, and he was able to supply that end. They've already got, I believe, Trent Perry coming back for the team. He was able to average 12.5 points, was a solid three-point shooter at 39.5% from the outside. And UCLA last year, they were one of the better three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. Petty was a part of a Texas Tech team that was one of the better three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. So I think that he's going to be a great fit for them. We've got Central Florida getting on the board for a pair of transfers as well. They already brought in Isaiah Malone, who had himself a nice season over at Florida Gulf Coast, but now they bring in both Caden Bosco along with Lewis Walker. For Walker, he was over at North Carolina A&T, and he was their main man this last year. 19 points, 5 boards at 6'6", shot 36.5% from three. A&T left something to be desired with their perimeter defense, and it looks like Central Florida once again going to be playing up tempo. They're going to be playing with a very exciting style on offense, and They are probably, once again, going to leave a little bit of something to be desired on the defensive side of things, but they have certainly formed that identity. And for Vasco, I would be very surprised if he's going to be some sort of starter or anything like that. But still, for Watford, he had a little bit of a shaky start to the season, ended the year strong. He's a career about 33% three-point shooter. 2 years ago at Central Michigan was shooting about 39% from three-point range. This past season was only about 32%, but became a more complete player. He had a steal, 4 assists, 4.5 rebounds, 10.5 points per game as a 6'6", little bit of a do-it-all guy. I think that he could be a nice, shall we say, gadget guy coming off the bench for the team. You probably don't want him to be the guy that you're like forming everything around, but at the same time, I do think that he's going to be helpful for this team moving forward. David Punch, he is going to be staying within the great state of Texas, but now he goes from TCU, and he is going to be becoming a Longhorn. And for Texas, they did need a little bit more down low after defensively last year. They were relatively rough. Now, there was more of the perimeter defense rather than the inside defense, but Punch, he is going to be able to give you a lot down low. 14 points, a little bit over a seal, 2 blocks per contest. Not a guy that's going to light you up from three-point range. A solid offensive piece, but a guy that's a little bit better on the defensive side of things. I think that this is a good pickup for them. I like what they're doing there as they picked up he along with Isaiah Johnson, who was over at Colorado this last season. And for UC Riverside, it's becoming very clear that they're going to look to be able to step it up a little bit more on defense. After last year, it was all sorts of rough for them. They pick up a guy in Devin Malcolm, who last season was a part-time starter over at Cal Baptist. As we know, with Rick Croy leaving Cal Baptist, that caused a little bit of an exodus there, but I knew he was solid for Cal Baptist. A steal, 6 points per game, only shot about 30% from three. Not going to give you a lot from the outside, and Riverside, they have certainly a lot to be able to just pick up the pieces on. They were rough both on offense and on defense, but still, I think that this is a good starting spot for them. I think that this is a nice piece to be able to pick up. I think that this is a rock-solid piece as well. Jordan Brown, he last season was playing over at UNC Greensboro, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Southern Utah. For Southern Utah, was not necessarily the world's greatest year for them this past season, but they pick up a guy in Brown that decided that he was going to be redshirting. He was a relatively highly touted guy out there in the great state of Georgia. For Southern Utah, the backcourt play just was not strong. They had a lot of turnover issues. He should be able to help out with that a little bit, so that'll help them out. And Syracuse, they continue to just romp through the transfer portal, and now they pick up Aiden Tobiason. I think that this is going to be a nice fit with the Jerry McNamara system. At 6'5", shot about 34% from three, 15 points, 4 boards, pair of assists per contest, and certainly not a guy that was going to force the issue and generate a lot of turnovers, but I mean, being able to pair him up with a pair of guys that had size for Siena this past season, Gavin Doty along Tasman Goodrick, and you've got Kawari Duel coming in, who's got all sorts of versatility. I think that this is a nice starting spot for them, so I like what they're bringing to the table. And Stone Cold Stephen F. Austin is getting on the board with a few transfers. Now, these are not necessarily going to be guys that had big numbers this past season, so it's going to be a lot of developmental for them. You've got Edwin Daniel. He this last season was over at LaSalle, about 4 points, 3.5 rebounds per game, 6'9" guy that probably is not going to provide a lot of versatility, but he should be able to help out a Stephen F. Austin team that was one of the most solid teams on the board this past season. Devin Kobe Pearson, he was a similar guy over at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi was a rock-solid defensive team as well, also out there in the Southland. He was averaging about 3 points, 2 rebounds per game as a 6'8", shall we say, big man, and then they pick up another 6'8" big man in Amari Reed as well. They are going to be bringing back a few guys from last year's team as well, and for Reed, again, 3 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. So Stephen F. Austin, they haven't necessarily gotten the big steak piece yet, but they've got a lot of ancillary pieces. They've got some starters, they've got some appetizers, so we'll see what they're going to be able to do with that. But certainly I do think that they're taking steps in the right direction to be able to build some rock solid depth. And for South Florida, they did a nice job in terms of being able to build some depth on Monday, as well as they bring in a trio of guys actually. Chris Davis, he this last season was playing over at Charleston, and while he was over at Charleston, had a little bit of an issue staying out there on the court, but when he was out there, 7.5 points per game, he was like the lone guy for Charleston that shot it okay from three. He shot 38.8% from three-point range and was primarily utilized as a six-man. He was all freshman out there in the Coastal Conference, so that's a nice pickup. Really like Garrett Johnson. He missed the entirety of the 2024-25 season due to injury. This last season was a part-time starter coming off of injury, and he was rock solid with 11.5 points, 3.5 3.5 boards. He's a career 36.5% three-point shooter at right around about 6'7", 6'8" so he's going to be able to give some good versatility. And then Sonny Wilson, guy that was a part of a Toledo team that left something to be desired defensively, but boy, could he light it up on offense. 17 points, 3.5 boards, 4.5 assists. Toledo actually did generate a few turnovers, 1.3 steals per game. Career 35% three-point shooter, and he's gotten better with every single year, shooting about 38% from three-point range this past season. So I do like what he's able to bring in. I think that he's going to be able to give this team a lot of offensive pop here. And Simeon Wilcher, he was over at Texas this last season, and he was a solid player for Texas. Was he amazing? No, but at the same time, I think that there's a lot of upside with him, a former top 50 recruit of St. John's this past year, about 5.5 points per game. He's a career only about 32.5% three-point shooter. As a freshman at St. John's, though, did shoot about 42% from the outside and became a bit more of a complete player with about 2 assists per game, despite the fact that he was coming in off the bench. I think that that is going to be a nice piece for Seton Hall. I do think that he's going to be able to play some rock-solid defense because he had to play for Slick Rick Pitino for 2 years. Recognized that Texas took a little bit of a step back on defense this past season, but still, I think that that is going to be a good fit. And then you've got San Diego picking up a pair of guys, Terry McMorris from Eastern Illinois, and then the big piece is Dusty Stromer, a guy that was a former top 75 recruit, saw some solid minutes over at Gonzaga, just did not do what you were hoping for over at Grand Canyon this last year. Not like he was terrible, but he was a sixth man with 6.5 points, only shot about 33.5% from three after in his 2 years at Gonzaga, shot 35% from three, so he is back in there in the WCC, was a part of a Grand Canyon team that was rock solid on defense. I'm going to call it what it is. He still leaves something to be desired as a defender, but at 6'6", he's able to pop it from three. He's a little bit of a one-trick pony, but for San Diego, they've already brought in a guy in Antonio Munoz, who I think should be able to take a little bit of pressure off of him as well. And then for Terry McMorris, he was really the main rebounder down low for Eastern Illinois this last year, 7.5 points, 5.5 boards at 6'7". He's capable of popping threes, doesn't necessarily do the world's greatest job of it, but last 2 games of the season, he was able to put up 15 points apiece, and he had a combined 25 rebounds, so he's going to help out a San Diego team that left a lot to be desired on the glass. Obviously, they move on in the offseason from Steve Lavin, also gave the team a block per game, so he's going to be able to give this team a little bit more rough and tumble than they've had in the past, and we're looking to get down and dirty with regards to all these transfers and get you set for the upcoming college basketball season. We've got a lot of transfers to sift through. We've got about 200 days of the offseason to get prepared for what is going to be the best college basketball season ever. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever for this podcast, you have 1 or 2 ways we all fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_81. Keep in mind, letters the mean does not matter, so per usual, please send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm coming at you guys every single day with this podcast, having great guests aboard like Rob Donaldson, who joined me today, taking a look at all the news and notes, and then once we get into the season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.